This video lecture is about yarns. Yarns it's a term used that describes a continuous strand of textile fibers, filaments, or material in a form that's suitable for knitting or weaving or otherwise forming a type of textile fabric. The goal of this part of the lecture, this first part, is to learn how yarns are described and identify the types of yarns in fabrics. By the way they're described, we start to understand how yarns are linked to product performance. Here you'll see from your iTextiles typical classifications of yarns. And so there are simple yarns that you can have in different configurations. You can have a single yarn. And if you take single yarns and put them together, you get a plied yarn. If you take plied yarns and put them together, you get a cord. And if you put cord yarns together and twist them together, you get a rope. There are several fancy or novelty yarns that we'll look at in the second part of this lecture. And composite yarns as well. You can think of them as analogous to composite fabrics, and that they're made of completely different parts that are put together. Yarns tend to be classified by being filament or spun. Spun yarns are staple fibers, and they need to be twisted. Those fibers need to be twisted to hold them together. So spun yarns can be natural fibers or they could be manufactured fibers. Filament yarns are only filament fibers. That the fibers tend to be the same length of the yarn itself. And so on a spun yarn, you can untwist it and take it apart, and it will come apart in very small pieces. But a filament fiber, the pieces that it comes apart in when you untwist it are the same length of the yarn itself. There are some monofilament products that are made from a single fiber. Things like sewing thread, you might see fishing line is the classic example, nets, and wigs. They are very strong, non-absorbent kind of products, and they're not frequently seen in garments. Most yarns that you see that are filament yarns are multi-filament yarns. You can also have monofilament tape yarns that are extruded flat. And so you think of it like a fishing line that's been flattened. You can also have a sheet that's extruded, a sheet of synthetic product that's extruded and cut into tape monofilament yarns. These are really inexpensive, but also, as you would suspect, very strong and durable. So used in things like sacks and outdoor coverings because they're non-absorbent and can last a long time if they resist UV. But your multi-filament yarns may be many hundreds of fibers. They are, your smooth filament fibers form smooth yarns. They have no fiber ends along the length of them. You may see those fiber ends at the end of the yarn itself, but not along the length at all. So they don't tend to lint or pill. They are strong. They can be very strong and compact and dense. You can kind of see in this micrograph the surface that it makes and how all the fibers are parallel to each other. This makes them more wind and water resistant. You don't have a lot of bulk to them or any loft or cover necessarily, and they also have the ability to make very strong and sheer fabrics. As we know, your synthetic fibers can be bulked, and that they can be heated and then shaped in a particular way and then cooled and hold on to that shape. The bulked fibers, if you take a bulked filament, they have the aesthetics and the comfort of a spun yarn. They, in bulking compared to a smooth filament, is more absorbent, it's more permeable to water and air, and tends to be more comfortable along its length. It is, of course, slightly weaker than you would have with a smooth filament type of yarn, but it still doesn't shed or pill as much as you would see with a spun yarn. And also, bulking can add a little bit of elasticity to a yarn as well. Texturing can happen in a wide variety of ways, and there's several ways that are described in iTextiles that I want you to look at. There's an air jet, false twist, and knit to knit. I'm going to talk about that here in a second to give you an example, but you'll want to review those in iTextiles as methods of bulking. There's actually a texturing method where a fabric is knit out of a synthetic material and heated to soften in that state and then cooled. And so this creates a very crinkly shape. It keeps the loops in it and makes a very bulky type of yarn. As we said, staple fibers make spun yarns. The spun yarns tend to, compared to your filament, your smooth filament, or even your bulked filament, they tend to have a more fuzzy surface, and they need more twist to them to keep, because you have very small parts being put together. So you need a lot of twists along the length of it to keep them together. So those fibers are less parallel, they tend to be, and so that's duller and not as smooth as you'd see with a filament yarn. And they can be weaker yarns, but they're also warmer yarns and sometimes much more comfortable next to the body. Spinning yarns is a much more involved production process. Spinning is one of the oldest manufacturing arts and often is described as an invention that's as significant as the invention of the wheel. On the left, you see a woman, you can't see the bottom of it, but she's using a drop spindle to spin by hand. And this is something I've tried that's really, really labor intensive, takes a lot of patience to gain that skill. The spinning wheel, which was actually invented in India, was exported to Europe in the 14th century. And this made spinning a lot easier. I've done both, and the spinning wheel is a very kind of meditative practice for me, where the drop spindle is a very exhaustive practice. So spinning wheel helped kind of move us into the industrial era. When you were making things by a drop spindle or even a spinning wheel at the time, people didn't have a lot of garments to wear. They may have had a closet of a couple of garments because it was such a labor-intensive process to make yarns themselves. Right now, of course, most of what we do is machine spinning. So after the Industrial Revolution, yarn became a machine process. And it begins by what we call opening bales of fiber. That's what you see on the right here. It is taking the bales that you see in the middle and loosening them, starting to clean them a little more, blending the fibers for more uniformity along their length to make sure that they're mixed and uniform. Then we can do something called carding them, which we talked about in our cotton section, where there's machines that have wire teeth along them that start to align the fibers or make them more parallel. You're going to make a better quality yarn the more parallel you can get those fibers to each other. And it also gets rid of fibers that are too short to be spun within a yarn. A second process is combing, and that's a better alignment, further quality if you go to that step to try to align the fibers even more precisely, more parallel along their length. When fibers start to come together, the next step is called a sliver. Here you see on the left these beautiful barrels of what looks like a really large type of yarn. It starts to look like it, but it's very weak. Of course, I could pull this together or pull this apart very easily. But it's a drawing process in that you take the fibers and you continue to pull them along their length, but twist them at the same time. There's often a step between a sliver here on the left and a yarn called a roving, and that's where you, again, have started to insert twist and had made the yarn much, much thinner by pulling on it. The most frequent kind of machinery that you might hear about for making yarns are called ring and open-ended spinning. Open-ended spinning, the roving stage is eliminated. So you move from sliver to yarn. It is 3 to 5 times faster than ring spinning. It takes carded yarns to do it, but it produces heavier yarns like your denim and your poplin and maybe something that went into towels. It is not a great process not good for manufacturing fibers, but it's usually staple fibers that are produced very quickly in open-ended spinning. Ring spinning is more common for your combed fibers, so your finer yarns that are meant to be made stronger. There are negative effects, of course, to spinning, even machine spinning. If you've ever been in a machine-run spinning factory, it's very, very loud. The machinery is very, very loud. And any kind of fiber making process, I've been in the developing world and watched people even knitting all in one room or spinning all in one room from very old methods like a drop spindle or a spinning wheel, and fibers float in the air all the time. And so you can imagine in a factory system having a lot of machines, how much fiber must float in the air. So in any of those situations, people should be wearing masks and filters, and so fibers don't lodge into their lungs when they're working in these places. You can blend fibers, and so you've probably noticed this on your labels and you probably thought about this as we've talked about it during class, of trying to mix qualities of different fibers, to use a cotton to make something more comfortable, but a polyester to make it strong as well. And so blending fibers within a yarn, within the same yarn, is something like that, like a cotton poly mix, or adding a 3% spandex to give a yarn a little bit of stretch. Or think of our pashmina, where there's a silk and wool or cashmere mix to it. That's called a blend when you have the different fibers in the same yarn. A mix is different yarns in the same fabric. And so this is a real visual display of a mix where it's obvious that the yarns in each direction here are doing very different things. Here I see a shiny yarn that's certainly some kind of synthetic, but then I see this very loose kind of spun yarn here as well. And so this is a mix with different yarns in the same fabric. Yarns are also described by twist. So twist is this spiral arrangement that holds fibers together. And twist will vary with the length and the yarn size and the end use that you want. So as twist increases, you need to think about yarn strength increasing at the same time. Low twist yarns tend to be used in your fabrics like flannel and fleece. It's soft and cheap fabrics to make, and you can often see, if you take a yarn out, you can often see the twist in the yarn itself. They're really comfortable type of yarns in the fabrics, but they pill and lint more than other yarns. Better quality yarns are higher twist that are more evenly distributed. Average twists are more compact and smooth. So you see on the left here, the smoothness to that versus what you see on a low twist fabric. They are a bit more expensive, but most of the fabrics in your swatch kit probably have an average twist to them. They tend to be the most durable yarns. Filament yarns may tend to be a low twist or a very high twist. They don't sit in this average category as much. They're more on the poles. So average twist is mostly a spun yarn category. And then high twist is the highest number of turns per inch. When you take these yarns out of a fabric, they may twist or even kink up on themselves because they have such a high twist to them. High twist fabrics are nice, as we've said before, because they can make very strong and sheer fabrics, and something that's used in crepe, something we looked at before. Yarns have numbers that communicate their size. In staple fibers, a low number means it is bulky and thick. So on the left, you may have a yarn size of 4, whereas even super bulky would get really lower than that and be a 000. A fine yarn would be much higher. So socks are a size of 20, an average size of a 20 yarn, whereas sewing thread, a cotton sewing thread, might be a 50. Filament fibers, it's more of a direct relationship. They're the opposite. The denier of the yarn refers to its diameter, and a low number is really fine. So hosiery might be a 6 or 8, whereas a suitcase might be a 330 type of yarn. So the higher number, the thicker the yarn, which is more direct. So the terms and concepts we were introduced to in this lecture are filament and spun, understanding the difference between the performance of those two, bulking filament yarns, spinning and understanding the labor intensity and machinery used there, the difference between the definition of blend versus mixture, the role of twist in yarns, and the how yarn size works for spun yarns versus filament yarns.